I am Lydia, 33 years old, and my husband told his best friend I was too ordinary for him. He thought my oversized hoodies and my quiet nights working on a little logistics project meant I was a failure he had outgrown. So when he announced I was not on his level, I did not cry or scream. I simply looked at him and said, "Okay." What he did not know was that my little project was about to close a $34 million acquisition. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever proven a narcissist wrong in the most expensive way possible. The devastating realization of who I had married did not happen during a massive blowout argument. It happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in the hallway of our expansive suburban home. I was carrying a tray with 2 mugs of freshly brewed dark roast coffee, intending to bring them to my husband Nathan and his best friend Devin. Nathan was 35 and working as a commercial real estate manager. Lately, he had become obsessed with appearances, luxury cars, designer watches, and networking with high society types. I, on the other hand, spent my days building a supply chain optimization platform from my home office. I preferred comfort over couture, choosing to invest my energy into code and client acquisition rather than country club memberships. As I approached the living room, the heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. I heard the clinking of ice in their whiskey glasses, followed by Devin speaking in a hushed, conspiratorial tone. "So what are you going to do about Lydia?" Devin asked. "I mean, look at you now, man. You are moving up in the world, rubbing elbows with serious investors. She just does not fit the picture anymore. She is practically invisible." I stopped walking. My hands tightened around the wooden serving tray. I waited for my husband of 5 years to defend me. I waited for Nathan to tell Devin that I was a brilliant software founder, that my relentless work ethic was the reason we could afford the down payment on this very house, or simply that he loved me. Instead, Nathan let out a cold, condescending laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "I know," Nathan replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I think I settled. She is too ordinary for me. Just hoodies, laptops, and that dead-end warehouse startup. I need someone on my level, someone who understands how to play the game, dress the part, and elevate my brand. Lydia is just holding me back." The words hit me like a physical strike to the chest, but they did not break me. A strange, icy calm washed over my entire body. The confusion and hurt that should have brought me to my knees were instantly replaced by absolute crystal-clear focus. I did not turn around and run away crying. I did not drop the tray to create a dramatic, shattering entrance. I pushed the heavy oak door open with my shoulder and walked right into the room. Nathan froze. The smug, self-satisfied grin wiped completely off his face the second he made eye contact with me. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. Devin suddenly found his expensive leather loafers incredibly interesting, refusing to look in my direction. The silence in the room was absolute, thick, and suffocating. Nathan opened his mouth, stammering, trying to form a sentence, trying to backtrack or claim I had misunderstood. I did not give him the chance to spin a lie. I walked over to the glass coffee table, carefully set the wooden tray down, and looked directly into his panicked eyes. "Okay," I said, just that one single word. "Okay." I turned on my heel and walked out of the living room, my posture perfectly straight. I did not slam the door behind me. I did not stomp up the stairs. I simply walked back to my home office and quietly closed the door. The absolute lack of emotional hysterics from me seemed to paralyze Nathan. For several long minutes, I heard absolutely nothing from the other side of the house. No footsteps, no whispers. Just the heavy weight of a marriage fundamentally fracturing in real time. Sitting at my desk, I looked at the dual monitors displaying my complex logistics algorithms. Nathan thought this was a dead-end warehouse startup. He had completely ignored my late-night meetings with venture capitalists, my grueling pitch presentations, and the massive scaling my team had achieved over the past 8 months. He was so blinded by his own superficial pursuit of wealth that he could not recognize real success when it was sleeping in the same bed as him. About 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open and close as Devin made a hasty exit. Then came the slow, hesitant footsteps of my husband approaching my office. He knocked softly, a pathetic sound compared to his earlier bravado. "Lydia," Nathan called out through the wood. "Lydia, please let me in. We need to talk about what you heard. I was just blowing off steam with Devin. It was just stupid guy talk. You know I did not mean any of it." I stared at my computer screen, watching the code compile. I did not answer. I let the heavy silence stretch out long and cold, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. He knocked again, a little harder this time, his voice pitching higher with sudden, undisguised panic. He knew he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, but his ego refused to truly apologize. I just kept typing, ignoring the man outside my door. My old life was over. The countdown to his absolute ruin had officially begun, and I would not shed a single tear today. The silence over our house did not break. Nathan pretended the incident never happened. He assumed my lack of screaming meant I accepted my place. By Friday, he reverted to his grandiose self, adjusting his designer tie as he drove us to his sister's house. I sat staring out the window in my linen button-down and dark jeans. I was meticulously calculating my exit strategy. Nathan's younger sister, Naomi, lived in a sprawling mansion that screamed new money. At 32, she emulated her brother's obsession with status. Opening her mahogany front door, she was draped in a silk cocktail dress, entirely too formal for a Friday dinner. She air-kissed her brother's cheek before her eyes slid over to me, traveling from my flats up to my unstyled hair. "Still shopping at discount racks?" Naomi asked, her voice dripping with sugary sweetness. "I thought Nathan's recent bonuses might have bought you a trip to a decent boutique." I kept my expression neutral. "I like to be comfortable, Naomi," I replied evenly. Nathan chuckled, slipping his arm around his sister. "You cannot force someone to appreciate high fashion, Naomi. Some people are perfectly content blending into the background." "Come on, let us get a drink." He walked inside, abandoning me at the door. It was a petty humiliation I previously excused as sibling banter. Tonight the filter was gone. I saw exactly what they were: vipers feeding on the insecurities of others to inflate their hollow egos. I walked to the formal dining room, already set with expensive crystal. Standing near the bar was Jamal, Naomi's husband. Jamal was 34, an African-American executive specializing in mergers and acquisitions at a top investment bank. Unlike his wife and brother-in-law, Jamal possessed a quiet, calculating intelligence. He did not need to shout about his success, because his track record spoke for itself. He handed me a tall glass of sparkling water, with a respectful nod, taking in the tension. We sat down for dinner. The conversation became a highlight reel of Nathan and Naomi's perceived importance. They bragged about real estate yields, country club waitlists, and people they deemed socially inferior. I ate my salad in silence, mentally reviewing the code integration for my software platform. Then Naomi inevitably turned her crosshairs back to me. "So, Lydia," Naomi said, swirling her expensive wine, "how is that little shipping project of yours doing? Have you gone bankrupt yet? I heard the logistics sector is absolutely brutal for small-time amateurs." "It is not a shipping project," I said, keeping my voice unbothered. "It is a cloud-based warehouse optimization software. And no, we are not bankrupt. We are actually scaling." Nathan let out a patronizing groan, waving his fork. Scaling. That is the word she uses when she gets 3 new local delivery trucks to use her app. It is a cute hobby. It keeps her busy in the home office while I handle the heavy lifting with commercial properties. Real money requires real risk. Lydia, not just typing on a keyboard in a hoodie. His sheer arrogance was suffocating. He was mocking the very business currently fielding acquisition offers higher than his entire firm's annual operating budget. Actually, Jamal interjected, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the toxic laughter. "The logistics tech space is currently one of the most aggressive sectors for venture capital." Jamal turned his attention to me, resting his elbows on the table. "Lydia, are you utilizing predictive analytics to manage inventory overflow? Or is your algorithm strictly focused on real-time route optimization? The shift in the room's dynamic was palpable. Nathan's smirk faltered his ego, bruising instantly because the most successful man in the room was taking me seriously. We use a hybrid model, I answered, looking directly at Jamal. The proprietary algorithm I wrote predicts supply chain bottlenecks based on seasonal data and reroutes inventory automatically before the warehouse hits capacity. It cuts overhead waste by 22%. Jamal raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. 22% is a massive margin in logistics. If your churn rate is low, a platform like that is a prime target for a major acquisition. You should be extremely proud of that architecture. Before I could thank him, Nathan slammed his wine glass down on the table. Let us not blow it out of proportion, Jamal Nathan snapped, flushing with irritation. She is basically just moving boxes around on a screen. It is not corporate finance. It is glorified package tracking. Can we talk about something that actually matters? I have a massive commercial deal closing next week that is going to redefine this family's wealth. Jamal stared at Nathan for a quiet moment. He picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth, and simply said, "Of course, Nathan. Let us hear about your real estate deal." But the damage to Nathan's fragile pride was done. He spent the rest of dinner aggressively boasting, desperately trying to reassert dominance over the table. Naomi fed his ego with endless compliments, creating a perfect echo chamber of narcissism and delusion. I sat back and watched them. I watched my own husband belittle my life's work. I watched his sister revel in my mistreatment. And I watched Jamal, the only person with actual business acumen, silently observe the absolute foolishness of his wife's family. In that dining room surrounded by expensive decor and cheap personalities, my remaining feelings for Nathan completely evaporated. They thought I was ordinary. They thought I was small. They had no idea I was holding a nuclear bomb in my back pocket. I realized then that I did not just want to leave Nathan. I wanted to completely dismantle his illusion of power. I was going to let him dig his own grave, and I would not offer him a ladder when the dirt started caving in. He would lose everything and have no one to blame but his own arrogance. The weekend passed with suffocating politeness. When Monday morning finally arrived and Nathan drove off to his firm in his leased sports car, I did not waste time crying over the disaster of our marriage. Tears were a useless currency. I went straight to my home office, locked the door, and opened my laptop. If Nathan was bold enough to insult me in front of his sister and his best friend, his arrogance was likely bleeding into other areas of our life. I needed to see exactly how deep his delusion went. I logged into our joint banking portal. Usually I managed the household finances, while Nathan handled his own investment accounts. But we kept a shared high-yield savings and a joint credit card for emergencies and large household expenses. I started combing through the digital statements line by line. At first glance, everything looked normal. Mortgage payments, utility bills, premium grocery deliveries. But Nathan was arrogant, not meticulous. He had set up paperless billing, assuming I never checked the granular data of the PDF statements. I downloaded the last 6 months of transactions. There it was, a glaring anomaly buried on page 4 of the October statement. $15,000. The vendor name was Cartier. I stared at the screen, letting the digital ink burn into my retinas. $15,000. My mind raced. Our anniversary was in March. My birthday was in August. I walked into my bedroom, opened my simple wooden jewelry box, and looked inside. There were no diamonds, no platinum chains, no Cartier. Nathan had not bought me a gift. He had used the joint account, an account heavily funded by the initial revenue generated from my logistics software, to buy luxury jewelry for someone else. I went back to my desk and opened his shared digital calendar. For weeks, he had been blocking off Tuesday and Thursday evenings for what he labeled as networking dinners and high-value client acquisitions. Tonight was Tuesday. His calendar showed an 8 o'clock dinner reservation at a notoriously exclusive French bistro downtown. I did not confront him when he came home to change into a tailored suit. I did not ask questions when he splashed on expensive cologne and told me not to wait up because the client was demanding. I just smiled, wished him a good evening, and waited exactly 15 minutes after his car pulled out of the driveway. Then I grabbed my keys, got into my unassuming hybrid sedan, and followed him to the city. The evening air was crisp as I parked across the street from the French bistro. The restaurant featured expansive floor-to-ceiling windows designed for patrons who wanted to be seen. I sat in the darkness of my car, blending perfectly into the shadows. It did not take long to spot him. Nathan was seated at a prime table near the window. He was leaning forward, laughing, his posture exuding the fake manufactured charm he reserved for people he deemed important. Sitting across from him was a woman who represented everything Nathan considered high class. She looked to be about 30. She was striking with flawless hair, a tight designer dress, and an aura of practiced perfection. She was holding up her phone, taking a selfie with a glass of champagne, angling her head just right. I recognized her immediately. Vanessa. She was a prominent public relations director and a minor lifestyle influencer in the city. Her social media was a curated feed of luxury vacations, expensive dinners, and high society events. She was exactly the kind of shiny, superficial accessory Nathan wanted on his arm. And sparkling brilliantly around her neck was a delicate, unmistakable Cartier diamond pendant. My $15,000 pendant. Any ordinary wife might have lost her mind right then. Any ordinary woman might have thrown open her car door, marched into that restaurant, flipped the table, and screamed until her throat bled. She would have demanded answers. She would have caused a public scene, giving Nathan the perfect opportunity to call her crazy and unhinged. I was not an ordinary woman. I was an engineer of systems, a builder of algorithms, a woman who solved complex logistical nightmares for a living. I dealt in data, not drama. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I rested my elbows on the steering wheel to steady my hands. I zoomed in through the glass windows of the bistro. The lighting inside was perfectly bright. I snapped photo after photo. I captured Nathan holding her hand across the table. I captured Vanessa smiling brightly, the diamond pendant catching the light. I took a clear video of him leaning over the table to kiss her. I gathered irrefutable high-definition data. Sitting in that cold car, the reality of my situation crystallized. This was no longer just about a failed marriage or a husband who had fallen out of love. This was about financial parasitism. Nathan was not just emotionally abusive, he was actively draining our joint resources to finance a fake lifestyle. He was stealing from the foundation I had helped build to impress a woman who cared only about labels and price tags. He looked down on my plain clothes and my quiet late nights coding, yet he was perfectly happy to siphon the money generated by my sweat and brilliance to buy shiny trinkets for his mistress. His hypocrisy was absolute. He called me small while using my money to make himself look big. I lowered my phone. The anger inside me compressed, solidifying into something cold, heavy, and unbreakable. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt a dangerous, predatory sense of purpose. Nathan had violated the most basic rules of partnership. He had broken the contract. I put the car in drive and slowly pulled away from the curb, leaving them to their expensive meal and their incredibly cheap romance. It was officially time to start building my final trap. The morning after I watched my husband buy another woman's affection with my hard-earned money, I did not go to my home office. I drove to the downtown high-rise housing the law firm of Rachel, a 50-year-old attorney known for absolute ruthlessness. Rachel was not a family lawyer who held hands and offered tissues. She was a corporate shark who specialized in asset protection, hostile takeovers, and burying liabilities. I had retained her 2 years ago when my logistics startup first started attracting serious venture capital. I walked into her corner office, bypassed the pleasantries, and laid a printed folder on her massive glass desk. Inside were bank statements highlighting the $15,000 Cartier purchase alongside the high-definition photographs and videos of Nathan and Vanessa at the bistro. Rachel adjusted her glasses, opened the folder, and flipped through the evidence with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining an X-ray. She offered no false sympathy. She simply tapped a manicured fingernail against the photograph of Vanessa. "This is sloppy," Rachel said, her voice sharp and precise. "He is leaving a financial paper trail that a first-year law student could track. Adultery is one thing, but dissipating joint assets gives us leverage." I sat straight in my leather chair. "I want to divorce him," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I want him excised from my life, and I want my capital protected. I will not let him use my company to fund his delusions of grandeur." Rachel closed the folder, folded her hands, and gave me a calculating stare. "That is where we hit a massive complication," Rachel said. "We live in a state with strict asset division laws. You started this logistics software company after you and Nathan were legally married. You used joint funds, even just a small amount, to launch the initial infrastructure. Under the eyes of the law, that makes your startup marital property. If you file for divorce right now, Nathan is legally entitled to 50% of your business assets." The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I stared at her, absorbing the mathematical reality of her words. Nathan, who had never written a single line of code, who had actively mocked my long hours, and who currently believed my company was nothing but a dead-end hobby, would legally own half of it. "I have been fielding acquisition offers," I told her, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Major conglomerates are circling. If a buyout happens, Nathan walks away with exactly half the payout." Rachel nodded grimly. "Exactly half. Unless we can prove extreme financial malfeasance that offsets his share, which is incredibly difficult to do. Or unless he voluntarily signs away his rights to your business in a post-nuptial agreement." I leaned back, my mind racing through algorithmic solutions to this human problem. "Nathan is a narcissist," I said slowly. "He genuinely believes my company is worthless. He thinks I am just playing on a computer while he handles real estate deals worth millions. He is obsessed with his own projected wealth." Rachel smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. "Then we use his arrogance against him. We do not file for divorce yet. We wait. We let him believe he is the apex predator until he hands you the key to his own cage." I left Rachel's office with a strategy colder and more calculating than any software architecture I had ever designed. The transition from marital grief to legal warfare was complete. I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was a chief executive protecting her enterprise from a hostile threat. I returned home and went straight back to work, compartmentalizing the disgust I felt for the man I married. Hours later, the front door opened, signaling Nathan's arrival. I listened to his heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway. He walked into my office, loosening his silk tie and sighing loudly to ensure I noticed his presence. He looked exhausted, but it was a performative exhaustion, the kind meant to signal his self-importance. He leaned against the doorframe, looking down at me as I typed. "You have no idea how brutal it is out there today," Nathan complained, rubbing his temples. "The commercial real estate market is vicious. I spent the entire afternoon wrangling investors and managing real money. It is a completely different world from whatever it is you do in here all day." I stopped typing and looked up at him. The juxtaposition was almost laughable. Here was a man complaining about managing real money while actively draining our savings to buy jewelry for his mistress. Here was a man boasting about his high-stakes career to a woman who had spent her morning structuring a legal defense to protect a company worth infinitely more than his entire portfolio. I kept my face perfectly neutral. "It sounds very stressful, Nathan," I replied softly. He scoffed, walking over to pour himself a drink from the small bar cart in the corner of my office. "It is stressful," he said, taking a long sip of his bourbon. "But that is the burden of actual success. Someone has to carry the financial weight of this household." He turned and looked at my monitors filled with complex back-end infrastructure with absolute disdain. "I just wish you had a little more ambition, Lydia. You sit in this dark room wearing the same boring clothes, playing with your little shipping app. Do you ever want to achieve something real? Something that actually matters?" I looked at my husband, studying his smug, entirely unearned superiority. He had no idea that he was standing in the epicenter of his impending ruin. He had no idea that the ordinary woman he was mocking was actively plotting his absolute legal execution. "You are right," I said quietly, offering him a small, chilling smile. "I should probably start thinking bigger." Days after my realization in the home office, Nathan finally initiated the confrontation I had been waiting for. The weekend had arrived with a heavy, stifling atmosphere. Nathan paced the kitchen island all morning, avoiding eye contact, while loudly taking phone calls that were clearly staged to sound important. I sat at the granite counter sipping black coffee and reviewing lines of code on my tablet. I knew he was psyching himself up for something monumental. Around noon, he abruptly ended a call, slipped his phone into his pocket, and gestured toward the living room. I followed him, taking a seat on the edge of the velvet sofa. He remained standing, towering over me to establish physical dominance. "Lydia, we need to have a serious conversation about our future." Nathan began, looking past me rather than at me. "I have been doing a lot of soul-searching lately. The truth is, I feel suffocated. I feel like I am carrying the weight of this entire household on my shoulders, and it is draining my drive. I need a temporary separation. I need space to find myself again, to rediscover the man I am supposed to be, without the anchor of domestic monotony dragging me down." I kept my face perfectly still. Finding himself was a remarkably poetic way to describe moving into a luxury downtown apartment to sleep with Vanessa. He was framing his infidelity as a noble quest for personal growth. I did not argue. I did not beg him to stay. I simply nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue his performance. My lack of resistance emboldened him. He walked over to his leather briefcase resting on the console table and pulled out a thick manila folder. The facade of the tormented husband instantly vanished, replaced by the aggressive, cutthroat real estate mogul he desperately wanted to be. "Since we are taking this step, we need to be practical," Nathan said, tossing the folder onto the glass coffee table in front of me. "As you know, my firm is on the verge of closing a commercial real estate deal that will completely disrupt the market. We are talking about a portfolio valuation in the tens of millions. My personal equity in this venture is going to skyrocket over the next few months. I cannot allow my professional success to be compromised by our personal issues. I need to protect my assets." I looked down at the documents spilling out of the folder. The bold capitalized letters at the top of the first page read, "Post-nuptial Asset Separation Agreement." I recognized the standard legal boilerplate immediately. It was exactly the kind of contract Rachel and I had discussed, delivered to me on a silver platter by the very man I intended to destroy. "I want you to sign this today," Nathan demanded, his voice growing hard and authoritative. "It outlines a complete and total separation of our individual business assets. What I build is mine, and what you build is yours. If this temporary separation becomes a permanent divorce, I do not want you bringing lawyers after my wealth. I have worked too hard to secure my impending millions to let you walk away with half of my equity just because we happened to be married when the deal closed." He leaned closer, resting his hands on his knees, his eyes narrowing with undisguised contempt. "Look, I am actually doing you a favor, Lydia. I am agreeing to let you keep 100% of your little logistics software company. I will not touch a single cent of your business. You can keep your warehouse app, your servers, and your delivery routes. It will give you a nice, safe safety net to fall back on when you are living on your own. It is a generous concession on my part, considering I funded the household while you played startup founder." The sheer magnitude of his arrogance was breathtaking. He genuinely believed he was protecting a fortune while tossing me pennies. He had absolutely no concept of the tech industry, no understanding of venture capital, and no clue that my little warehouse app was currently undergoing a massive due diligence audit by one of the largest technology conglomerates in the world. He was so terrified that I might take half of his highly leveraged, debt-ridden real estate bubble that he was willingly legally severing his ties to an actual gold mine. I knew I had to play my part perfectly. If I signed the agreement too quickly, his paranoid narcissistic brain might suspect a trap. He needed to feel like he was bullying me into submission. He needed to feel like the absolute victor. I let my shoulders slump. I looked away, biting my lower lip as if trying to hold back a wave of devastating tears. I let my hands tremble just a fraction as I reached out to touch the edge of the contract. "Nathan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, sounding fragile and defeated. "Are you really doing this? You want to separate everything we have built. You are really leaving me." He scoffed, standing up straight and crossing his arms over his chest. "I am protecting my future, Lydia. You need to sign the paperwork. If you try to fight me on this, I promise you, I will hire the most vicious legal team in the state. I will drag this out until you are completely bankrupt. Just sign the damn agreement and keep your little shipping project. It is the best deal you are ever going to get." I slowly picked up the heavy, expensive fountain pen he had placed next to the folder. I stared at the signature line, feeling the cold, smooth metal of the pen against my fingers. I kept my head bowed, hiding the sharp, predatory smile that was fighting to break across my face. I was not just signing away my marriage. I was signing his financial death warrant. I paused with the heavy fountain pen hovering right above the signature line. As much as I wanted to sign the document right then and there to seal his fate, I knew the legal reality of our situation. If I signed a post-nuptial agreement under duress or without independent legal counsel, Nathan could later argue the contract was invalid. I needed this document to be bulletproof. I placed the pen back onto the coffee table and looked up at him, keeping my expression entirely submissive. "Nathan," I said, making my voice sound defeated, "I will sign this for you. I will give you the separation you want, but you know how the courts are. If I do not have my own lawyer quickly review this, a judge might throw it out later. I just want to make sure it is legally binding so we do not have to do this twice." Nathan rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by the delay, but his arrogant mind recognized the logic. He believed I was just trying to cross the legal T's and dot the I's of my own surrender. "Fine," he snapped, snatching the pen off the table. "Have your little strip mall lawyer look it over tomorrow morning. But I want this signed and filed by the end of the week. I am packing a bag and heading to a hotel downtown. I need space to focus on my upcoming deals." He marched right up the stairs to pack his things, unaware that he was leaving our marriage to sleep with Vanessa. I remained on the sofa staring at the printed pages of the contract. The trap was laid. Now I just needed to close the cage. The next morning, the atmosphere inside my home office was electric. I sat at my desk, the door firmly locked, staring at my secure video conferencing monitor. On the screen were 5 executives from one of the most powerful global tech conglomerates in the world. They were not smiling. They were strictly business, and they were ready to finalize the acquisition of my logistics software platform. "Lydia," their lead acquisition director said, his voice crisp and professional, "our technical team has completed the final due diligence on your proprietary supply chain algorithm. We are incredibly impressed with the 22% reduction in overhead waste. It is exactly the architecture our global distribution network needs. We are prepared to make our official offer today." I held my breath, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "We are offering $34 million. He continued, reading from a document on his desk. "Pure cash acquisition. No earn-out periods. No stock options to vest. A clean total buyout of your entire enterprise. However, this offer is contingent upon your immediate agreement to a strict non-disclosure agreement. Until the funds are wired and the press embargo is lifted in exactly 3 weeks, you cannot breathe a single word of this deal to anyone outside of your direct legal counsel. If this leaks, the deal is dead. $34 million. The number echoed in the silent room. It was not just life-changing money. It was generational wealth. It was the kind of financial power that could crush a man like Nathan into absolute dust. "I accept the terms," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Send the non-disclosure agreement to my attorney." 3 hours later, I walked into Rachel S. downtown law office and placed Nathan S. postnuptial agreement squarely on her glass desk. Rachel picked up the document, her sharp eyes scanning the legal jargon drafted by Nathan S. aggressive attorneys. She read through the clauses dictating the total separation of business assets, the waiver of spousal support, and the complete financial isolation Nathan had demanded. As Rachel reached the final page, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. She took off her glasses and looked at me, genuine amusement dancing in her eyes. "This is a masterpiece of male arrogance," Rachel said, tapping the contract. "His lawyers drafted this to be absolutely ironclad. They were so terrified that you might try to claim a fraction of his commercial real estate fund that they built a fortress around his assets. But in doing so, they built the exact same fortress around yours. By signing this, Nathan is permanently and legally surrendering any right, claim, or interest in your logistics company. He is locking himself out of the castle to protect a pile of dirt. I received the official offer this morning," I told her, keeping my voice low. $34 million in cash. I am under a strict non-disclosure agreement. Nathan has no idea, and he cannot know until the deal goes public in 3 weeks. Rachel let out a sharp laugh. It was a rare sound in her office, a sound of absolute legal victory. She pushed the contract back across the desk toward me and handed me her personal pen. "Sign it," Rachel commanded. "Sign it right now, and I will have it notarized and filed with the court before Nathan even finishes his second martini with his mistress. By the time his real estate deal inevitably collapses under its own leveraged weight, you will be sitting on $34 million in legally protected, untouchable liquid cash." I slowly took the pen from her hand. I did not hesitate. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear for the death of my 5-year marriage. I smoothly signed my name on the dotted line, executing the document exactly as Nathan had demanded. I signed away my right to his crumbling real estate portfolio, and in exchange, I secured my entire technology fortune. When I handed the document back to Rachel, the transformation was complete. The ordinary wife Nathan so deeply despised was gone. I was a $34 million woman, and I was going to make him watch me rise while he burned. With the post-nuptial agreement officially filed and notarized, Nathan did not even pretend to maintain the illusion of a temporary separation. He received the legally binding confirmation from his attorneys on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday evening, he had completely dropped the narrative of needing space to find himself. Instead, he launched a calculated and ruthless public smear campaign designed to destroy my reputation and elevate his own. He wasted absolutely no time introducing Vanessa to his entire social and professional circle. For a man obsessed with appearances, Vanessa was the ultimate shiny new accessory, and he paraded her around our mutual friends with sickening pride. The narrative he spun was carefully constructed to paint me as the villain and himself as the long-suffering martyr. Through the grapevine, I began hearing the vicious stories he was telling Devon and their network of commercial real estate investors. Nathan claimed I was a lazy, unmotivated woman who completely refused to support his rising career. He told everyone that my startup was just a pathetic excuse to sit around the house in sweatpants while he went out and earned the real money. According to him, I was an ordinary, boring anchor holding back his massive potential, and he simply had to cut me loose to reach his true level of success. The speed at which our mutual friends accepted his version of reality was staggering. Invitations to weekend dinner parties and charity galas suddenly stopped arriving in my inbox. Women I had known for 5 years, people I had hosted in my own dining room, began quietly removing me from group chats. The few who did reach out only sent passive-aggressive text messages offering fake pity. They would say things like, "I am so sorry Nathan outgrew you," or "You will find someone more your speed eventually." They had all bought into his lie, eager to stay in the good graces of a man they believed was on the verge of becoming a multimillionaire real estate tycoon. But the absolute worst of the social betrayal came directly from Nathan's family. His sister Naomi did not just accept Vanessa. She embraced the woman with open, enthusiastic arms. Naomi had always despised me for refusing to care about designer labels and high society gossip, so Vanessa was exactly the kind of shallow companion she had always wanted for her brother. Within days of the separation, Naomi began taking Vanessa to expensive weekend brunches and exclusive boutique shopping trips. Naomi made absolutely sure I witnessed every single moment of their new bond. My social media feeds were suddenly flooded with high-definition photographs of Naomi and Vanessa drinking mimosas and posing in front of luxury storefronts. The captions were deliberately designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. Naomi would post pictures with Vanessa and write captions like, "Finally spending time with a woman on our level," or "Upgrades are always necessary." She made sure to tag Nathan in every single post, creating a public digital record of my absolute erasure from the family I had been part of for half a decade. Nathan also joined in on the psychological warfare. He would send me demanding, condescending text messages from his luxury hotel downtown, ordering me to box up the rest of his expensive suits and have them ready for a courier. He reminded me constantly that the house would be going on the market soon and advised me to start looking for a cheap, ordinary apartment that fit my lifestyle. He treated me like a dismissed employee rather than a wife of 5 years. The conflict was entirely social and emotional, a relentless barrage of humiliation designed to break my spirit. I would be lying if I said it did not hurt. It was agonizing to watch a man I had loved completely rewrite our history. It was painful to realize that the people I had considered family could discard me the second a shinier, more compliant version of a woman walked into the room. Sitting alone in the large, quiet house we had bought together, the isolation felt heavy and oppressive. There were nights when the sting of Naomi's public mockery and the silence of my former friends made my chest physically ache. But every single time the urge to defend myself bubbled up every time I wanted to scream the truth about his massive debt and my impending fortune, I forced myself to stop. I remembered the strict non-disclosure agreement. I remembered the $34 million sitting just out of reach, waiting for the legal clearing period to end. I could not risk the acquisition. I could not give Nathan any reason to suspect that his legally binding post-nuptial agreement was the biggest financial mistake of his entire life. So I endured it. I swallowed the insults. I ignored the passive-aggressive messages from the country club wives. I let Naomi post her vicious little pictures, and I let Nathan build his towering monument of lies. I channeled all of my betrayal and social isolation into absolute unwavering patience. I checked my encrypted email daily, communicating strictly with Rachel and the acquisition team, ensuring every single line of code and every legal clause was perfectly transferred. I watched the calendar on my desk with the focus of a sniper. The press embargo was going to lift in less than 3 weeks. Nathan thought he was burying me under a mountain of social shame, but he was really just building a massive audience for my ultimate victory. I let them laugh, let them mock my clothes, let them call me ordinary. Because soon the money would clear and the truth would be louder than any lie they could ever tell. I was ready to watch his entire world completely fall apart right in front of his eyes. The countdown to his absolute humiliation had officially begun, and I would not let anything stop my perfect retaliation. His destruction was completely guaranteed. 2 days after my silent vow, my phone vibrated with an unexpected text message. It was not from Rachel, nor was it another demanding directive from Nathan regarding his suits. The name on the screen belonged to the one person in my husband's family who possessed actual intelligence and integrity: Jamal. The message was brief and completely professional, entirely lacking the toxic superiority his wife Naomi loved to project. He asked if I had time for a quick private cup of coffee on the other side of town. He specifically mentioned it was regarding a highly sensitive financial matter. I agreed immediately. I met Jamal at a quiet, dimly lit roastery far away from the upscale neighborhoods where Naomi and Vanessa liked to parade themselves. When I walked in, Jamal was already seated in a corner booth dressed in a sharp charcoal suit sipping a black espresso. He stood up politely to greet me, a stark contrast to the dismissive arrogance Nathan and Devon always displayed. We sat down, and the atmosphere between us was immediately thick with serious unspoken implications. Jamal did not waste time with hollow pleasantries or fake apologies about my impending divorce. He operated in the high-stakes world of mergers and acquisitions, and he approached this conversation with the same clinical precision he used in a boardroom. Lydia Jamal began leaning forward and keeping his deep voice low. I am stepping way over the family line by talking to you today, but my professional conscience will not allow me to sit back and watch you get financially destroyed. I know what Nathan has been saying about you to his friends, and I know all about his new relationship with Vanessa. Naomi is treating the separation like a reality television show, but I deal with hard numbers, and Nathan's numbers are a catastrophic liability. You need to pull your credit reports today, freeze your personal accounts, and sever every remaining financial tie you have with that man immediately. I listened intently, my heart beating at a steady, controlled pace. I asked Jamal to explain exactly what he meant. He took a slow breath and laid out the reality of my husband's grand commercial real estate venture. Nathan had been boasting for weeks about a massive portfolio acquisition that was going to redefine his wealth and elevate him to the top tier of the city's elite. According to Jamal's extensive industry network, that portfolio was an absolute toxic wasteland. Nathan had grossly over-leveraged his firm's capital and personally guaranteed loans with predatory interest rates. The entire project was a massive debt bubble, and it was weeks, if not days, away from a spectacular, very public bursting. Nathan is living an absolute lie, Jamal said, looking me directly in the eyes. He does not have millions coming his way. He is hemorrhaging liquidity. He has been taking whatever joint funds he can access and moving them into shadow accounts to maintain this facade of immense wealth for Vanessa and his investors. He is renting expensive cars, booking luxury hotel suites, and buying designer jewelry on credit that is backed by vaporware. When the banks finally call in those commercial loans, the collateral damage is going to wipe him out completely. He will be facing total bankruptcy, and he will drag you down into the financial abyss with him if your names are still legally bound on any shared assets. As Jamal spoke those terrifying words, a profound, electrifying realization washed over my entire body. I stared at the dark surface of my coffee as the missing pieces of Nathan's psychological puzzle snapped perfectly into place. The post-nuptial agreement. It had not just been a product of his supreme blinding arrogance, it was a desperate, panicked maneuver. Nathan forced me to sign that contract because his ego genuinely believed his high-risk gamble was going to pay off, and he wanted to hoard all the imaginary profits entirely for himself. He wanted to ensure that when his ship came in, his ordinary wife could not claim a single dime of his perceived grand fortune. But there was a darker, more cowardly layer to his strategy. Nathan deeply understood that his portfolio was standing on the very edge of a financial cliff. By forcing the complete legal separation of our business assets, he was also trying to build a firewall. If his commercial real estate bubble burst, he thought he was brilliantly isolating his toxic debt, ensuring his creditors could not come after my stable, albeit ordinary income, to satisfy his failing margins. He wanted to maintain his lavish lifestyle with Vanessa while keeping his failures carefully compartmentalized and hidden from public view. He thought he was playing a brilliant game of four-dimensional chess, completely unaware of the devastating reality he had just created for himself. I looked back up at Jamal, a genuine relaxed smile forming on my lips. I did not look like a terrified woman who had just been told her husband was facing absolute financial ruin and potential legal disaster. I looked exactly like a completely untouchable woman who had just been handed the winning lottery ticket. Jamal frowned, his sharp analytical mind clearly confused by my calm, almost radiant reaction to his incredibly dire warning. Jamal, I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and full of sincere gratitude, I cannot thank you enough for taking this massive personal risk to warn me about this impending disaster. You are a truly good, honorable man, and I will never ever forget what you did for me today. but you genuinely do not need to worry about my financial safety. Nathan already forced me to sign a fully comprehensive post-nuptial agreement 3 weeks ago. He legally severed all of our business assets and liabilities. Jamal's eyes widened in shock as his brilliant mind processed what I had revealed. He realized Nathan had permanently locked himself out of my future. I smiled. Letting the absolute certainty of my victory settle between us. Jamal leaned back against the leather booth, letting out a breath that was half disbelief and half pure respect. He shook his head, a quiet laugh escaping his lips as he realized the sheer magnitude of Nathan's colossal blunder. I thanked Jamal once more, paid for our coffee, and walked out into the brisk afternoon air. The countdown to the ultimate revelation was accelerating, and I had a final closing meeting to attend. 48 hours later, I sat in the high-security boardroom of Rachel's downtown law firm. The heavy mahogany doors were shut, and the room was completely silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I held a sleek tablet in my hands, staring at the encrypted banking portal that had been established specifically for my newly formed private trust. Rachel stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching the digital clock on her screen. The final signatures had been verified. The corporate handover was fully executed. We were just waiting for the final confirmation from the acquiring conglomerate's financial division. At exactly 2:00 in the afternoon, the screen on my tablet refreshed. A secure notification banner flashed across the top. The transaction was complete. I looked down at the account balance, watching the numbers populate across the digital ledger. $34 million. Pure, unencumbered liquid cash had just successfully landed in my legally protected private trust account. The money was entirely mine, entirely secure, and thanks to Nathan's aggressively drafted post-nuptial agreement, entirely out of his reach forever. I let out a slow, steady breath. The years of grinding in a small home office, the endless nights writing code, the exhausting pitch meetings where I was dismissed or underestimated. It had all culminated in this exact moment of absolute financial supremacy. Rachel walked over to the table and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, handing one to me. "We do not pop champagne until the press embargo lifts," Rachel said, her voice laced with sharp satisfaction. "But congratulations, Lydia. You are officially a multimillionaire, and your soon-to-be ex-husband has absolutely no legal recourse to touch a single penny of your fortune. The fortress is locked." We clinked our glasses together in the quiet boardroom, celebrating the perfection of our legal strategy. I left Rachel's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy burden of Nathan's emotional abuse and financial parasitism was completely gone, replaced by a titanium shield of wealth and independence. I drove back to the large suburban house, knowing my time within those walls was rapidly coming to an end. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a courier delivery van idling near the curb. A uniformed driver was walking up the manicured pathway holding an oversized, ridiculously ostentatious black envelope sealed with a thick gold ribbon. I stepped out of my car and intercepted the driver on the front porch. I signed for the package, noting the heavy cardstock and the expensive gold foil lettering on the front. I carried the pretentious envelope inside, set my keys on the counter, and carefully broke the gold seal. Inside was an extravagant, highly produced invitation to a massive gala event. The header proudly announced the official launch of Nathan's new commercial real estate portfolio. It was the exact same debt-ridden, highly leveraged fund Jamal had warned me about. Nathan was throwing a massive, expensive party to celebrate a financial house of cards that was on the absolute verge of total collapse. I scanned the details of the invitation. The gala was scheduled for this coming Saturday night at the most expensive 5-star hotel ballroom in the city. The guest list would undoubtedly include every major investor, socialite, and business competitor in Nathan's network. But the true purpose of the event was buried in the host details. "Nathan and Vanessa cordially invite you to celebrate the future of urban development." He was using this high-profile business launch to officially debut his mistress to high society. He was planting his flag, attempting to force his entire network to accept his new flashy lifestyle and his new flashy partner. As I slid the heavy invitation out of the envelope, a small piece of customized stationery fluttered out and landed on the hardwood floor. I bent down and picked it up, It was a handwritten note from Nathan, penned in his sharp, aggressive handwriting. I read the words slowly, letting the sheer audacity of his narcissism wash over me. Come see what real success looks like. Try to dress nicely. I stood in the silent foyer, holding the arrogant note in one hand and the invitation in the other. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted me to stand in the corner of a crowded ballroom in my plain clothes, watching him bask in the glory of his imaginary wealth, with a younger, flashier woman on his arm. He wanted to parade his fake success in front of the wife he believed was a complete failure. He wanted to break whatever remaining spirit I had left. I looked at the handwritten note again. Come see what real success looks like. I thought about the $34 million resting securely in my private trust account. I thought about the global press embargo that was scheduled to lift on the exact same Saturday night as his ridiculous gala. The timing was not just fortunate, it was absolute poetic justice. Nathan had built a massive stage, hired the lighting, and gathered the perfect audience for his own public execution. I walked into my home office and dropped the invitation onto my desk. I pulled out my phone and sent a decisive message to Rachel to confirm my attendance. I would give my husband exactly what he demanded. I was going to the massive gala. I was going to dress beautifully and destroy him completely. Tonight. The morning after receiving the invitation, I stood in front of my expansive walk-in closet. I slid the hangers across the wooden rod, taking inventory of my wardrobe. Nathan was right about one thing. My clothes were incredibly ordinary. Rows of comfortable neutral sweaters, simple denim jeans, and sensible flats stared back at me. This was the uniform of a woman who built a software empire from the shadows, a woman who valued function over form. But Saturday night demanded a completely different kind of architecture. I was not going to a party. I was going to a corporate execution, and I needed the appropriate armor. I did not go to a department store. I made a single phone call to a high-end personal stylist named Cameron, a man known for dressing the city's most elite female executives. I gave him a blank check and a very specific directive. I told him I needed a gown that commanded absolute authority, something that would suck the air out of a ballroom the second I walked through the doors. Cameron arrived at my house hours later with racks of exclusive designer garments. We bypassed the flashy sequined dresses that women like Vanessa favored. I did not want to look like a desperate reality television star trying to grab attention. I wanted to look like untouchable, terrifying wealth. We finally found the masterpiece. It was a custom-tailored deep emerald silk gown. The fabric draped perfectly, moving like liquid glass with every single step I took. The neckline was sharp and architectural, exuding raw power rather than soft vulnerability. It was paired with subtle, incredibly expensive diamond drop earrings and classic stiletto heels that gave me a towering, imposing silhouette. Cameron stepped back and admired his work, nodding in silent approval. When I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror during the final fitting, the psychological transformation was absolute. The woman looking back at me was not a discarded wife. She was not a victim of emotional abuse or a stepping stone for a narcissistic husband. She was a self-made titan. I was not dressing up to prove to Nathan that I was attractive enough for his shallow world. I was dressing up to attend my own victory lap. I was stepping into the physical manifestation of my $34 million reality. The armor was heavy, cold, and absolutely perfect. I felt an electrifying surge of confidence running through my veins. Every trace of the ordinary girl was gone, replaced by a woman who held the power to destroy a man's entire life with a single piece of paper. With the physical preparation complete, I drove to Rachel's office on Friday afternoon to finalize the legal weaponry. Rachel sat behind her desk, looking over a pristine stack of legal documents. She tapped her silver pen against the top page, her eyes gleaming with dark anticipation. "These are the final divorce filings," Rachel announced, her voice razor-sharp and steady. "I have included a heavily highlighted copy of the postnuptial agreement Nathan forced you to sign, along with a formal demand for his immediate eviction from your jointly owned properties. Because he legally separated your business assets, there is absolutely nothing left to negotiate. The division of property is already locked in place. You keep your entire fortune, and he gets to keep his suffocating toxic debt. I reviewed the documents carefully, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction as I traced the flawless legal logic. Every asset was cleanly walled off. My algorithms, my warehouse contracts, my offshore vendor agreements, and every single cent of the incoming massive buyout were perfectly shielded. There were no loopholes, no escape clauses, and absolutely no mercy. "When do we serve him?" I asked, looking up from the paperwork. Rachel smiled her signature predatory smile, leaning forward over the glass desk. "I have hired a private process server who specializes in high-profile, high-stakes deliveries. He will be at the gala tomorrow night dressed seamlessly as a wealthy guest. The moment the global press embargo lifts and the financial news goes live on the wire, the server will hand Nathan this exact folder. He will get hit with the public revelation of your wealth and the brutal finalization of his divorce at the exact same second. It will be a flawless, synchronized strike against his ego and his wallet." Saturday evening arrived with a quiet, thrilling intensity. I sat at my vanity while a professional makeup artist and hairstylist finished their meticulous work. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, flawless chignon, exposing the sharp angles of my jawline and the cold calculation in my eyes. My makeup was striking and elegant, devoid of any soft or romantic hues. I slipped into the emerald silk gown, feeling the cool fabric settle beautifully against my skin. I clasped the diamond earrings into place and stepped into my heels. I walked down the grand staircase of the empty house, the silence amplifying the sharp clicking of my footsteps against the hardwood floors. I surveyed the living room where Nathan had first insulted me to Devon. The memory of his cruel laughter no longer stung. It simply fueled my determination to see this through to the bitter end. Through the front window, I saw the sleek black town car waiting in the driveway to take me downtown to the luxury hotel. I took one final steadying breath. I did not feel any lingering sadness for the end of my marriage. I only felt the pure, exhilarating adrenaline of a predator closing in on its prey. I grabbed my evening clutch, stepped out into the crisp evening air, and headed straight into the lion's den. Nathan thought he was hosting a celebration of his brilliant success. He had no idea he had simply funded the venue for his own devastating downfall. Tonight, the entire city would finally see exactly what real success looked like. The town car glided to a halt in front of the grand entrance of the city's most exclusive hotel. A valet opened the heavy door, and I stepped out onto the pavement. The crisp evening air whipped around me, but I did not shiver. I felt impervious. I walked through the revolving glass doors and entered the sprawling lobby, the sharp clicking of my stiletto heels echoing against the marble floors. The air smelled of expensive lilies and aged leather. I bypassed reception and headed straight toward the grand ballroom. The double doors were propped wide open, spilling golden light and the soft sounds of a live jazz quartet out into the corridor. I paused at the threshold, adjusting the drape of my emerald silk gown. Then I stepped inside. The ballroom was a masterpiece of manufactured corporate excess. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm glow over hundreds of wealthy investors and high-profile socialites. Waiters carrying silver trays of champagne wove seamlessly through the densely packed crowd. As I walked further into the room, a strange, undeniable ripple moved through the attendees. Conversations began to stall abruptly. Heads turned in my direction. The usual background hum of networking dipped into a low, curious murmur. I did not break my stride. I kept my chin perfectly level, my eyes scanning the room with the cool detachment of an apex predator assessing its territory. It took less than 30 seconds for the host of the evening to notice the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Standing near the front of the ballroom, holding a crystal tumbler and holding court with a group of potential investors, was my husband Nathan. Devon stood to his left and Vanessa clung tightly to his right arm. Nathan looked up, irritated by the sudden distraction of his captive audience. His eyes tracked across the crowded room and locked onto mine. The reaction was instantaneous and intensely satisfying. Nathan physically froze. His mouth parted slightly, the arrogant smirk completely vanishing from his face. He blinked rapidly, evidently struggling to reconcile the radiant, commanding woman walking toward him with the ordinary wife he had left at home in simple sweatpants. Beside him, Devon fumbled his drink, splashing a few drops of dark liquor onto his expensive tailored shirt cuff. Vanessa reacted quite differently. Her eyes widened in initial shock, taking in the flawless architecture of my custom gown and the subtle flash of my diamond earrings. But her shock rapidly morphed into a hard, defensive glare. She recognized the immediate threat to her newly claimed territory. Vanessa did not wait for Nathan to recover his senses. She released his arm and marched across the ballroom floor to intercept me before I could reach the center of the crowd. She was wearing a heavily sequined, plunging red dress that screamed for attention, creating a stark contrast to the terrifying elegance I was projecting. She stopped just 2 feet in front of me, forcing me to halt. She plastered a tight, artificial smile across her face and looked me slowly up and down. "Well, look who finally decided to step out of the shadows," Vanessa said, her voice pitched perfectly to ensure the surrounding investors could hear every word. "I have to say, Lydia, you clean up surprisingly well. It is amazing what a few hours at a salon and a rented dress can do. I suppose you figured you had to put in massive effort to even step foot in a room with people of our caliber? It is a brave attempt, really." I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply offered her a serene smile that completely unnerved her. I looked at her gaudy, sequined dress, then back up to her heavily contoured face. "Thank you, Vanessa," I replied, my voice smooth and calm. "It is interesting to step out and observe how different people define elegance. You certainly look exactly as I expected you would tonight." Her fake smile faltered instantly, her brain working frantically to decipher the insult wrapped inside my polite tone. Before she could formulate a comeback, the sound of approaching heels interrupted us. Naomi pushed her way through the crowd, holding a half-empty martini glass. She had clearly been enjoying the open bar, and her face was flushed with alcohol and immediate hostility. She stepped up next to Vanessa, forming a united front, and glared at me with absolute contempt. "What on earth are you doing here, Lydia?" Naomi demanded, her voice loud and grating, drawing the attention of several bankers standing nearby. "Did you not get the memo that this event is for actual stakeholders and successful professionals? Or did you just come here to beg my brother to pay the rent on whatever cheap apartment you are moving into? Because I can promise you his charity has completely run dry." A few gasps rippled through the nearby listeners. Naomi stood tall, a cruel sneer resting heavily on her face. She thought she had just delivered the ultimate public humiliation. She fully expected me to crumble to cry or to turn around and run out of the ballroom in utter disgrace. She wanted a dramatic scene. She wanted to prove to her wealthy peers that I was exactly the pathetic, desperate woman Nathan claimed I was. I looked at my angry, bitter sister-in-law. I looked at the flushed, angry faces of the women trying so desperately to tear me down to elevate themselves. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over my entire body. They were actively digging their graves with absolute precision. "I am absolutely not here to ask Nathan for a single dime, Naomi," I said, keeping my posture relaxed and my voice effortlessly polite. I received a formal invitation, and I simply wanted to come and witness the absolute peak of Nathan's hard work. I want to be here to see exactly what he has earned. Naomi scoffed, rolling her eyes, though unease crossed her features. She could not comprehend my unbothered stance. Vanessa linked arms with Naomi, shooting me a victorious glare before marching toward the front. They retreated to the safe perimeter of Nathan, eager to be recognized in his elite circle. I remained where I was, accepting champagne from a waiter. I took a slow sip. I checked my silver watch. The press embargo was scheduled to lift in exactly 12 minutes. The jazz music faded as the ballroom lighting shifted. A spotlight illuminated the grand stage. A hush fell over the crowd of wealthy investors. Nathan strode confidently up the steps to the podium. He adjusted the microphone with an arrogant smile. He looked out, soaking in their undivided attention. This was his moment. This was the peak of the mountain he believed he had conquered all by himself. He gripped the edges of the podium, projecting the image of a fearless, visionary leader. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Nathan began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered in this magnificent room to celebrate more than just a real estate portfolio. We are celebrating the future of urban development. We are celebrating vision, relentless drive, and the sheer willpower it takes to build a legacy from the ground up." The crowd murmured in polite agreement. Nathan paused, letting his words hang in the air, ensuring every person in the room was hanging on his next sentence. He scanned the audience, his eyes briefly locking onto mine near the back of the room. His smirk widened. He was about to deliver his ultimate public humiliation. He was going to use this platform to validate his betrayal and elevate his mistress at my expense. Building an empire requires making incredibly difficult choices. Nathan continued, his tone shifting to something deeply patronizing. "It requires stripping away the dead weight that holds you back." For a long time, I was playing small. I was surrounded by a mindset of mediocrity. I allowed myself to settle for a life that was quiet, safe, and ultimately completely ordinary. But true success demands that you surround yourself with high-value people. People who understand the grind. People who look the part, who elevate your brand, and who challenge you to reach the absolute apex of your potential. A collective gasp, soft but distinctly audible, rippled through the wealthy guests, who intimately knew our marital history. Several heads turned in my direction to gauge my reaction. They expected me to flee the ballroom in tears. They expected me to shatter under the weight of his public cruelty. I did not move a single muscle. I stood tall in my emerald silk gown, holding my champagne glass with relaxed elegance. I maintained direct eye contact with the man on the stage, my expression completely serene. My unbothered demeanor confused the onlookers, but I knew that reacting to a dead man walking was a pointless expenditure of energy. Nathan, emboldened by the silence, turned toward the edge of the stage. He extended his hand, his eyes shining with manufactured adoration. "Tonight is a celebration of my new chapter," he announced loudly. "And I could not step into this incredible future without a woman who truly embodies elegance, class, and high-value partnership. Please join me up here, Vanessa." Vanessa practically floated up the carpeted steps, her sequined red dress catching the bright glare of the spotlight. She took Nathan's extended hand, beaming with absolute triumph. She stepped up to the podium, wrapping both arms around him and resting her head against his shoulder. They stood there, the picture-perfect couple of high society, basking in the glow of stolen money and toxic debt. The crowd erupted into applause. Devin cheered loudly from his position near the stage stairs. Naomi whistled and clapped, her face flushed with victory. They were celebrating a mirage. They were applauding a man who was entirely bankrupt, both morally and financially. I took another slow, calculated sip of my cold champagne. I watched Vanessa wave to the crowd, completely oblivious to the fact that her new prize was a financial sinking ship. I watched Nathan soak in the applause, entirely unaware that he had legally severed his ties to the only actual wealth in his household. His hubris was a magnificent, terrifying thing to behold. He had purposefully built this massive pedestal just to ensure his inevitable, humiliating fall would be completely spectacular. I checked my watch again. Exactly 2 minutes remained. Down at the front of the room, standing just inches from the stage stairs, Devin reached into his tailored suit jacket. I watched his movements with the clinical precision of a hawk. He pulled out his phone, likely intending to take a photograph of his best friend on stage. But instead of raising the camera, he froze. He stared down at the illuminated screen. The bright light reflected off his face, highlighting the sudden, dramatic shift in his expression. His mouth fell completely wide open. His eyes widened to an almost comical degree. The confident, wealthy swagger vanished in a microsecond, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He rapidly scrolled down the screen with a trembling thumb, reading the alert that had just flashed across his notifications. The color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He looked up from this glowing screen, his panicked eyes darting directly to Nathan, who was still smiling and waving to the applauding crowd. Then slowly he turned his head and looked across the expansive ballroom, his terrified gaze locking onto me in the back of the room. The absolute panic in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The press embargo had just lifted. The global financial news was live. The very first domino was finally falling, and it was about to crush every single one of them completely and forever. Devin did not care about the optics of ruining Nathan's perfect moment. He shoved past a group of senior vice presidents, nearly knocking a silver tray of champagne glasses out of a waiter's hands. He scrambled up the few carpeted steps to the side of the stage. The crowd's applause was already beginning to taper off, replaced by a low murmur of confusion as Devin aggressively grabbed Nathan by the elbow. Nathan tried to yank his arm away, keeping his rigid camera-ready smile plastered on his face for the audience. He leaned in and whispered harshly to his best friend, clearly furious at the unscripted interruption. Devin ignored the anger. He shoved his glowing smartphone directly into Nathan's chest. Nathan looked down. I watched his eyes track the bold black text displayed across the bright screen. It was a push notification from Forbes sent to millions of subscribers globally. The headline was unmistakable. Under the radar founder, Lydia sells logistics tech startup for $34 million. Below the headline was a high-resolution photograph of me taken during one of my final pitch meetings. The subtext detailed how my proprietary supply chain algorithm had just been acquired by a massive global tech conglomerate in a pure cash deal. It praised my quiet brilliance, calling it the most significant stealth acquisition of the fiscal year. Nathan stared at the screen. His brain, wired only for superficial real estate scams and rented sports cars, simply could not process the magnitude of the mathematical reality staring back at him. $34 million. Cash. He blinked heavily. He scrolled down the article with a shaking finger. The color drained from his face at the exact same terrifying speed it had drained from Devin's. Then the true symphony began. The ballroom was packed with venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, and corporate attorneys. These were people whose entire livelihoods depended on real-time financial data. They all had the same customized news alerts set up on their devices. One by one, phones across the massive room began to ping. Then a dozen chimed simultaneously. Then 50. Within seconds, the elegant jazz music was completely drowned out by the chaotic synchronized buzzing, ringing, and chiming of hundreds of smartphones receiving the exact same breaking news notification. Men in expensive tuxedos reached into their pockets. Women in designer gowns unclasped their evening bags. They looked down at their screens. The atmosphere in the room shifted so violently, it felt like the air pressure had completely dropped. The polite, superficial murmurs of a high society gala instantly transformed into sharp, frantic whispers. I watched a prominent venture capitalist standing 10 feet away from me read his screen, his jaw dropping open. He immediately turned his head to stare directly at me. The woman next to him tapped her husband's shoulder, pointing frantically at her phone, and then pointing at the stage where Nathan was currently suffocating under the weight of his own profound stupidity. The news spread like wildfire through dry brush. Guests began reading the article aloud to each other, the words, $34 million, cutting through the ambient noise over and over again. Naomi was standing near the front row holding her martini. Her phone buzzed. She checked it. The arrogant sneer she had been wearing all night melted into a mask of pure horror. She read the headline twice. She looked up at her brother, who was visibly hyperventilating on stage, and then she turned to look at me. The realization that she had just spent the entire evening loudly mocking a woman worth $34 million hit her like a freight train. She took a step backward, bumping into a waiter, completely losing her balance. These investors were sharks. They respected one thing above all else: capital. Nathan had brought them here to celebrate a leveraged, unstable real estate portfolio built on debt and desperation. But the notification glowing on their screens represented true, unencumbered, liquid wealth. The kind of wealth that shifted power dynamics instantly. They looked at Nathan with sudden, undisguised pity. He was a clown who had just thrown away a winning lottery ticket because he did not like the font it was printed on. On the stage, Nathan was physically shutting down. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was finally looking down at the ground, rushing up to meet him. He had just spent the last 5 minutes giving a pompous, arrogant speech about cutting out dead weight and elevating his brand. He had publicly humiliated me, calling me an anchor to his success. And now the entire room of financial elites was reading an article proving that the ordinary wife he had just mocked was a highly successful self-made technology titan. He looked at Vanessa, who was still standing next to him, totally confused by the sudden shift in the crowd's energy. She reached out to touch his arm, asking him what was wrong. Nathan flinched away from her touch as if she were made of actual fire. The audience stopped looking at the man on the stage. The spotlight was still shining brightly on Nathan and his mistress, but they had become entirely irrelevant. The entire ballroom, hundreds of the most powerful people in the city, turned their bodies like a magnetic pull had compelled them. They turned to look at the back of the room. They turned to look at me. I stood perfectly still in my emerald silk gown. I held my champagne glass with relaxed elegance. I did not shrink under the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. I met their gazes with the calm, terrifying certainty of a woman who had just checkmated her opponent in a game he did not even realize he was playing. I took a slow sip from my glass, tasting the sweet perfection of this flawless victory. The complete devastation of his empire was finally unfolding today. Nathan practically tripped over the microphone stand as he scrambled away from the podium. He did not say a single word of excuse to his audience. He did not even look at Vanessa. She stood frozen in the glare of the spotlight, her sequined red dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume completely abandoned by the man who had just paraded her as his ultimate prize. She reached out a hand to stop him, but he brushed past her with violent urgency, his eyes fixed entirely on me at the back of the ballroom. The crowd of elite investors, socialites, and venture capitalists parted for him like the Red Sea. They stepped back, pulling their tailored suits and expensive gowns out of his path, wanting absolutely no physical contact with a man in the middle of a catastrophic public meltdown. The whispers grew louder as he marched down the center aisle. I could hear snippets of their conversations. 34 million. Pure cash. He had no idea. The humiliation radiating from him was palpable, but true to his deeply narcissistic nature, Nathan did not process this as a personal failure. In his twisted mind, this was a betrayal committed against him. He closed the distance between us, his chest heaving under his tuxedo jacket. His face was a dark, furious shade of crimson. He stopped just inches from me, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me, a tactic that had worked 100 times in the privacy of our suburban home. Tonight, however, it had absolutely zero effect. I did not step back. I did not break eye contact. Lydia. What the hell is this? Nathan demanded, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet, cavernous space. He pointed a shaking finger at his phone. Why did I have to find out about a $34 million buyout from a financial news push notification? Why did you hide our money from me? The sheer audacity of his phrasing echoed through the silent ballroom. Our money! Less than 10 minutes ago, he had stood on a lighted stage and publicly declared me to be dead weight. He had paraded his mistress in front of my face and told the world he was cutting me loose. Now, with a massive fortune suddenly on the table, he was instantly attempting to reassert his rights as my husband. He was trying to mark his territory in front of the venture capitalists, desperate to prove he was still the man in charge of the incoming millions. He glared at me, waiting for me to shrink, waiting for me to offer a trembling apology for keeping him in the dark about the corporate acquisition. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. I let the heavy silence stretch, forcing him to stand there sweating under the intense scrutiny of hundreds of powerful people. He looked around, suddenly acutely aware of the massive audience witnessing his lack of control. He saw the wealthy investors watching him with narrowed, calculating eyes. He realized that screaming at the woman who had just executed the biggest tech acquisition of the quarter was a terrible strategic move. The aggressive anger melted off his face, replaced instantly by a slick manufactured charm that made my stomach physically turn. He straightened his posture, smoothed the lapels of his expensive jacket, and let out a forced, breathless laugh. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and reached out to grasp my shoulders. I stood perfectly still, letting his hands rest on the cold emerald silk of my custom gown. I mean, I am just in absolute shock, Nathan said, his voice suddenly dropping to a loud theatrical whisper designed to project an image of intimate partnership to the surrounding crowd. Baby, this is incredible. You actually did it. Why did you not tell me we were sitting on a gold mine? We are rich. We are going to build an absolute empire with this new capital. This changes everything for us. He actually believed it. His delusion was so profound, so deeply ingrained in his psychology, that he genuinely thought he could just seamlessly pivot from publicly humiliating me with his mistress to spending my $34 million payout. He thought a few sweet words and the legal title of husband would instantly grant him access to the fortune I had built, while he was busy tearing me down. I looked at his hands resting on my shoulders. I looked up into his desperate, greedy eyes. And then for the first time that entire evening I laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was a sharp, cold, and entirely merciless sound that sliced through the heavy silence of the ballroom. Nathan recoiled, his hands dropping from my shoulders as if he had been burned by fire. The fake charming smile slipped from his face, replaced by a look of profound confusion and rising undeniable dread. "We," I asked, letting the word ring out clearly for the entire crowd to hear. "I am sorry, Nathan, but there is no we. You made that perfectly clear when you brought another woman on stage to celebrate your new chapter." I smoothly opened my rigid black designer evening clutch. I reached inside the small compartment and pulled out a sharply folded, thick piece of legal paper. I slowly unfolded it, deliberately smoothing the creases with my manicured fingers. It was a certified, heavily highlighted copy of the exact document he had shoved in my face just 3 weeks ago. I held it up between us so he could read the bold print. "You seem to have a terrible memory regarding your own legal demands," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and authoritative. "You forced me to sign away all claims to our individual businesses 3 weeks ago to protect your precious real estate. You get absolutely nothing, Nathan. Not a single penny of my corporate buyout money belongs to you today or ever." Nathan stared at the folded paper in my hand. His eyes darted across the highlighted paragraphs. He recognized the brutal legal phrasing his expensive attorneys had meticulously drafted 3 weeks ago. The cognitive dissonance was too massive for his fragile ego to process. He could not accept that he had actively engineered his own financial exclusion. The slick charm evaporated, replaced by a raw, unhinged fury. His face contorted into a mask of rage. He lunged forward, swiping at the document, but I smoothly pulled my hand back, slipping the contract into my clutch. "You witch!" Nathan screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. His outburst echoed through the ballroom, shattering any remaining illusion of high society decorum. "That contract is void. You signed it under false pretenses. You hid a massive corporate acquisition from me. That is fraud. I am going to sue you into the ground. I will hire a team of litigators to tear that document to shreds. You are not walking away with my money. I will tie you up in court until you are begging to settle." I did not flinch at his screaming. I simply stood my ground, watching a grown man throw a temper tantrum over a bed he had made for himself. Before I could explain the airtight nature of a non-disclosure agreement, another voice pierced the tension. "How dare you!" Naomi shrieked, pushing her way to the front of the circle that had formed around us. She stomped up to stand beside her brother, her face twisted in an ugly snarl. "You snake! You sat at my dinner table pretending to be some nobody while you were secretly negotiating a buyout. You deceived my brother. You trapped him. You are nothing but a fraud who used our family to build your tech empire. You owe Nathan half of that money, and we will make sure the city knows how deceitful you really are." Naomi was vibrating with indignation. She was furious not just for her brother, but for herself. She realized she had spent the evening mocking a woman who could buy and sell her life with the stroke of a pen. She wanted to reclaim her superiority by branding me a villain. The guests watched the spectacle with wide eyes, captivated by the implosion of the host family. Nathan fed off his sister's energy. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You heard her, Lydia. You are finished in this town. That post-nuptial agreement is dead. I am calling my lawyers to file an injunction against your trust accounts. That will be a short phone call, Nathan." The voice was deep, resonant, and carried authority. The crowd parted. Jamal stepped out from the sea of suits and gowns. He walked toward the center of the confrontation with the calm pacing of a man who commanded boardrooms for a living. He stood tall, his posture relaxed but imposing. He did not look at his wife Naomi. He looked at Nathan, his eyes filled with a cold pity. "Do not make a bigger fool of yourself than you already have," Jamal said, his voice echoing in the silence of the ballroom. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of every investor in this city. You need to stop screaming and start understanding the reality of your situation." Nathan glared at his brother-in-law, his chest heaving. "Stay out of this, Jamal. This is a family matter. My wife committed fraud." "She committed zero fraud," Jamal countered, taking another step forward. "As an executive who oversees mergers and acquisitions every day, let me explain what happened here. Lydia was bound by a non-disclosure agreement during her acquisition period. If she had breathed a word of that $34 million deal to you or anyone else, the transaction would have been terminated. She was legally obligated to remain silent." Jamal turned his gaze to the crowd, addressing the room of experts who were nodding along with his assessment. They understood law perfectly. Then Jamal locked his eyes onto a sweating, panicking Nathan. "And as for that post-nuptial agreement," Jamal continued, his tone turning sharp and merciless. "You drafted it. You presented it. You demanded she sign it to protect your own highly leveraged real estate portfolio. You explicitly mandated the total separation of all business assets. You instructed your attorneys to make the contract impenetrable. I know this because you bragged to me about how watertight it was last week. You built a fortress around your respective companies." Naomi grabbed her husband's arm, her eyes wide. "Jamal, whose side are you on? You have to help Nathan find a loophole. There has to be a way to break the contract." Jamal gently removed his wife's hand from his sleeve. He looked down at her with disappointment before turning his attention back to her spiraling brother. "There are no loopholes, Naomi. I reviewed a copy of that contract when Nathan showed it to me. The document is ironclad. It is a masterpiece of protection. And because Nathan initiated it, drafted it, and forced it upon Lydia without any coercion on her part, no judge will overturn it." Nathan stood paralyzed. The manic energy drained out of him, replaced by a hollow realization. He looked at Jamal, his mouth opening and closing. The legal reality was crushing him. He could not sue me. He could not freeze my accounts. He had no claim to my wealth. Jamal delivered the final blow with precision. He looked at the broken man standing in the center of the ballroom and shook his head. "You played yourself, Nathan." Jamal stated, his voice ringing out loudly and clearly over the silent audience. "You traded $17 million for your own ego. Your endless greed completely blinded you to the brilliant woman standing right next to you. Now you must simply live forever with the massive permanent consequences of your truly spectacular and highly arrogant stupidity." The silence that followed Jamal's brutal assessment hung heavy over the ballroom. Nathan looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. He swayed slightly on his feet, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The wealthy investors surrounding us, men and women who had initially attended this gala to network and celebrate a rising star, now looked at him with absolute disgust. They were sharks, and there was blood in the water. But Jamal was not finished. He adjusted his suit jacket and turned his attention away from the post-nuptial agreement, pivoting to the very reason this extravagant party had been organized in the first place. If you thought trading away $17 million was the peak of Nathan's financial incompetence, you are sorely mistaken, Jamal announced, his deep voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the vast room. Since we are all gathered here tonight to celebrate the official launch of his new commercial real estate portfolio, I feel it is my professional duty to provide some much-needed transparency to the potential investors in the audience. Nathan's eyes widened in fresh horror. Jamal, stop, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Do not do this. You are ruining my business. You ruined your own business. Nathan Jamal shot back without a single ounce of mercy. You built a massive debt bubble and you invited all these people here to blindly fund your delusions. Jamal turned fully toward the crowd of stunned executives. The portfolio Nathan has been pitching to you for the last 3 months is completely toxic. Jamal stated, his tone clinical and precise. He has grossly over-leveraged every single property. He has personally guaranteed mezzanine loans with predatory interest rates that he cannot possibly service. He has been taking funds from his personal accounts and moving them around to create the illusion of liquidity. But the facade officially ended today. I received a call from a colleague at his primary lending institution just before I arrived tonight. Nathan's accounts were frozen by the bank this very morning. He is in default. The foreclosure notices are already being drafted. He is completely bankrupt and currently millions of dollars in debt. A sharp, piercing sound shattered the heavy silence. A crystal champagne flute slipped from Vanessa's fingers and smashed into dozens of glittering pieces against the polished marble floor. The sharp noise caused several people to jump, drawing all eyes to the woman standing frozen near the base of the stage. Vanessa stared at Nathan with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The reality of Jamal's words crashed down upon her heavily contoured face. She had spent the last several months carefully positioning herself as the partner of a rising commercial real estate tycoon. She had gladly accepted expensive dinners, lavish hotel stays, and a $15,000 Cartier diamond pendant, fully believing she was securing her place in the upper echelons of high society. She had happily joined Nathan in mocking me, assuming I was the discarded, worthless baggage of a man destined for immense wealth. Now the truth was laid bare under the bright ballroom chandeliers. She had not stolen a titan of industry. She had tied herself to a sinking anchor. And the woman she had just insulted, the woman standing quietly in an emerald gown, was the one holding $34 million in pure cash. You are broke, Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling with rising panic. You brought me up on that stage, you paraded me in front of all these people, and you are completely bankrupt, Vanessa. Please, Nathan stammered, taking a desperate step toward her with his hands raised in a placating gesture. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. I can fix this. I just need to restructure some of the debt. I can get the bank to lift the freeze. Do not touch me, Vanessa shrieked, recoiling from him as if he were covered in a contagious disease. She looked at him with absolute revulsion, her eyes darting frantically around the room as she realized the extent of her own public humiliation. Everyone in the city's elite circle was watching her stand next to a financial fraud. She had burned her own bridges to be with a man who could not even afford the tuxedo he was wearing. You lied to me, Vanessa yelled, her carefully constructed, elegant persona completely disintegrating. You told me you were building an empire. You told me Lydia was holding you back. You are nothing but a pathetic, broke loser who used me to make yourself feel important. You are millions in debt, and your wife is the actual millionaire. You are a complete joke, Nathan. She did not wait for his response. Vanessa turned on her heel, her sequined red dress catching the light as she aggressively pushed her way through the crowd of stunned investors. She marched toward the heavy double doors of the ballroom, leaving the shattered pieces of her champagne glass behind. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, echoing loudly. The exodus did not stop with Vanessa. The venture capitalists, the hedge fund managers, and the elite socialites who had come to celebrate Nathan's success looked at each other with silent, unanimous agreement. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a man facing imminent financial ruin and public scandal. One by one, they set their half-empty glasses down on passing silver trays. They turned their backs on the stage. The low murmur of polite conversation resumed, accompanied by the sound of expensive shoes moving swiftly toward the exit. Nathan stood paralyzed in the emptying ballroom. He watched his professional network evaporate before his eyes. The people he wanted to impress were actively fleeing. Naomi stood frozen nearby, unable to process the absolute destruction. I remained in my spot, watching the glorious collapse of the man who had so foolishly called me ordinary. He was entirely alone, drowning in debt, deeply humiliated and stripped of every illusion. The ballroom, once a vibrant epicenter of high society networking, was now practically a ghost town. Waiters quietly cleared abandoned champagne flutes from cocktail tables, moving with practiced discretion to avoid drawing attention to the disaster unfolding in the center of the room. The exodus had been swift and absolute. I watched the last of the heavy double doors swing shut, sealing the remaining few of us inside this cavern of failure. The stark reality of the situation finally settled over the remaining group. Nathan was destitute and I was wealthy beyond their wildest comprehension. Naomi stood frozen a few feet away, clutching her empty martini glass. The alcohol flush on her cheeks had been entirely replaced by a sickly, terrified pallor. Her sharp mind was rapidly recalculating the power dynamics. She had spent the entire evening, and indeed the entire duration of my marriage, loudly mocking me. She had actively championed Vanessa as a necessary upgrade. But Naomi worshipped money above all else, and she suddenly found herself standing on the wrong side of a $34 million divide. She set her glass down on a passing silver tray and took a tentative step toward me. Her posture shifted from hostile aggression to groveling submission. She forced a strained, utterly pathetic smile onto her face. Lydia Naomi stammered, her voice shaking, as she tried to bridge the massive gap she had created between us. Lydia, I am so incredibly sorry. You have to understand, we had no idea. Nathan lied to all of us. He told me you were holding him back, that you did not care about the family, and that your company was a complete failure. I was only acting out of loyalty to my brother because he fed me absolute garbage. You know how manipulative he can be. We are family, Lydia. You and I, we have always been sisters. I never would have treated you that way if I had known the truth. She reached out, attempting to place a comforting hand on my arm. I did not move, but I shot a glance at her hand so cold and sharp that she immediately pulled it back, as if she had been shocked. I looked at the woman who had spent years trying to make me feel small. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No anger, no pity, just complete indifference. You are not my sister, Naomi. I said, my voice low, perfectly level, and entirely devoid of emotion. Loyalty is a reflection of character, and you just proved you do not have any. You blindly supported a liar because you worship status, and the moment his status vanished, you threw your own brother under the bus to try and save yourself. You are exactly as hollow as he is. Never speak to me again. Naomi opened her mouth to argue, to plead, or to cry, but the absolute finality in my eyes silenced her completely. She took a step backward, shrinking into herself, finally understanding that she was permanently locked out of my life and my fortune. Devin chose that exact moment to step forward. He had been lingering near the edge of the stage, watching the total implosion of his best friend. Devin was a survivor, a man who built his entire career on social connections and proximity to power. Seeing Nathan ruined, Devin immediately tried to salvage his own standing. Lydia Devin began raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I just want to say congratulations on the acquisition. It is a phenomenal achievement. I had no part in Nathan making those terrible decisions or hiding his debt. I was just as blindsided as you were. I hope this does not affect our professional relationship going forward. You are going to need strong investment partners now, and I would love to offer my services. I slowly turned my head and looked directly through him. I did not offer him a single word. I did not grant him the dignity of a response. He was a parasite looking for a new host, and acknowledging him would only validate his existence. I simply held his gaze for 3 agonizing seconds until he looked away in deep shame, completely dismissed. I turned my back on all of them. I adjusted the strap of my evening clutch and began my walk toward the exit. The thick silence of the ballroom amplified the sound of my stiletto heels striking the polished marble floor. Click, click, click. The sharp, rhythmic noise echoed off the vaulted ceilings, sounding like the final, definitive ticking of a clock. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who owned the world. Behind me, a low, guttural sob broke the silence. I glanced over my shoulder one final time. Nathan had completely collapsed. The man who had stood on that stage just 30 minutes earlier bragging about his high-value life and elite circle was now on his knees. He dropped to the floor of the empty ballroom, burying his face in his hands, weeping openly. His expensive tuxedo was wrinkled. His pride was entirely shattered, and the crushing weight of his absolute ruin had finally broken him. He was a king of nothing, crying over the ashes of an empire he burned down himself. I faced forward and pushed through the heavy double doors of the ballroom. I walked through the quiet hotel lobby and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air. The valet immediately signaled my waiting chauffeured car. The driver promptly opened the heavy rear door of the massive black luxury sedan. I gracefully slid into the soft leather seat, leaning back and closing my eyes. The powerful engine purred to life, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the completely ruined gala far behind me. I had walked into that hotel an ordinary, discarded wife. I drove away a completely untouchable titan, ready to conquer tomorrow. 2 weeks later, the intoxicating high of that Saturday night had settled into a permanent, unshakable reality. I sat in a cold, sterile mediation room located on the 42nd floor of Rachel's downtown law firm. The walls were constructed of frosted glass, and the heavy conference table was a massive slab of polished slate. There were no warm colors, no comfortable cushions, and absolutely no room for emotional manipulation. I wore a tailored black pantsuit projecting the exact kind of ruthless corporate authority Nathan had always pretended to possess. Rachel sat beside me, meticulously arranging the final divorce decrees into perfectly aligned stacks. We were waiting for the final act of this legal execution to commence. The heavy door opened, and Nathan walked in. The man who crossed the threshold was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant real estate mogul who had taken the stage at the gala. Nathan looked like an empty shell. His posture, once broad and imposing, was deeply stooped. The expensive custom-tailored suits were gone, replaced by a slightly wrinkled off-the-rack jacket that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. He had clearly lost a significant amount of weight in just 14 days. Deep dark circles bruised the skin under his bloodshot eyes. He looked exactly like a man who had not slept since the exact moment he realized he had thrown away $34 million. He took a seat across from us, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on the cold slate table. Rachel did not offer him a glass of water. She did not ask how he was doing. She simply tapped her silver pen against the thick stack of papers and initiated the proceedings with brutal efficiency. "Nathan, we are here to finalize the dissolution of this marriage," Rachel stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. "As dictated by the post-nuptial agreement you drafted, demanded, and signed, there is zero division of business assets. Lydia retains sole ownership of her private trust and her company acquisition funds. You retain sole ownership of your commercial real estate firm and all associated liabilities. You have waived spousal support. All that remains is for you to sign this final decree, and my client will officially be free of you." Nathan did not look at the paperwork. He kept his eyes fixed entirely on me. His breathing was shallow and a fine layer of sweat gathered on his forehead, despite the heavy air conditioning in the room. "Lydia, please," Nathan begged, his voice cracking with a pathetic, desperate pitch. "You have to help me. I am losing absolutely everything. The banks foreclosed on my apartment 3 days ago. I am currently living out of a cheap motel near the airport. The investors are furious. They are not just demanding their money back, they are threatening to press criminal charges for fraud. They are saying I misrepresented the financial health of my firm. If they go to the authorities, I will not just go bankrupt. I will go to prison. I am facing actual jail time, Lydia." He leaned forward, pressing his hands flat against the table, his eyes pleading for a mercy he had never once shown me. "I know I was wrong," Nathan continued, tears welling up in his bloodshot eyes. "I was arrogant. I was stupid. I let the pressure of the industry get to my head, and I treated you terribly. But we were married for 5 years. We built a life together. You know who I really am deep down. I am asking you, as the woman who promised to love me, just give me a small loan. Just enough to pay off the most aggressive creditors and keep the police away. It is pocket change to you now. A fraction of your new wealth could save my entire life." Rachel slammed her hand down flat on the slate table, the sharp noise cutting off his pathetic monologue. "Absolutely not," Rachel snapped, leaning forward like a striking cobra. "You do not get to invoke a marriage you destroyed to save yourself from the consequences of your own financial crimes. My client is not a bank, and she is certainly not your savior. Any transfer of funds to you right now could entangle her clean capital in your impending federal fraud investigations. You legally separated your assets. She will not give you a single dime to cover your massive incompetence." Nathan ignored Rachel, completely staring at me with a desperate, naked hunger. He was banking on the ghost of the ordinary, submissive wife he thought he had married. He expected me to cave under the weight of his tears. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I reached out and pushed the final divorce decree across the table toward him. I placed a pen right next to his trembling hand. "I am not going to give you a loan, Nathan," I said, keeping my voice incredibly smooth and steady. I watched the last shred of hope completely drain from his exhausted features. I leaned back in my comfortable leather chair, steepling my fingers together while watching his pathetic display of complete misery. I remembered the exact moment he had stood in our bright living room and cruelly dismissed my entire existence. I looked directly into the deeply bruised, bloodshot eyes of the broken man who had confidently tried to bury me alive. I let the crushing silence fill the sterile room one final time before I slowly leaned forward to face him. Then, I delivered the killing blow. "I am too ordinary for you," I stated, delivering his exact previous words back to him with absolute devastating precision. "Go find someone on your level, Nathan." His entire body slumped forward in total agonizing defeat. With a broken sob trapped in his throat, he finally picked up the silver pen and signed the heavy paper. The glorious end finally arrived for good this very day. With the ink dry on the divorce decree, the final pillars supporting Nathan's fragile reality rapidly crumbled into dust. He stumbled out of Rachel's building, a man entirely stripped of his wealth, his marriage, and his dignity. The financial fallout was swift and completely merciless. Within 24 hours, his supposed best friend delivered the ultimate corporate betrayal. Devin, the man who had actively encouraged Nathan to discard me for being too ordinary, saw the sheer magnitude of the incoming federal investigations. Self-preservation kicked in immediately. Devin formally dissolved their joint operating agreements, issuing a harsh, legally binding letter of severance. He publicly distanced his own investment firm from Nathan's toxic portfolio, throwing his former partner to the wolves to salvage his own professional reputation. Nathan called Devin dozens of times, leaving frantic voicemails begging for a bailout, but every single call went straight to a disconnected line. The brotherhood they had built on expensive whiskey and shared arrogance dissolved the second the money vanished. The walls kept closing in. Later that same week, Nathan arrived at the luxury downtown penthouse he had leased to impress Vanessa. He found a heavy iron padlock secured to the front door and a bright orange eviction notice taped to the glass. The property management company had grown tired of his bounced checks and empty promises. A few cardboard boxes containing his remaining personal belongings were unceremoniously dumped in the service hallway next to the freight elevator. He had traded a secure, comfortable life in our spacious suburban home for a few weeks of temporary glamour. Now he was standing in a sterile corridor holding a box of designer shoes he could no longer afford with absolutely nowhere to go. His bank accounts were frozen solid, his credit cards were permanently declined, and his reputation in the commercial real estate sector was completely radioactive. He was a total pariah. The shiny, high-class world he had sacrificed his marriage to join had chewed him up and spit him out without a second thought. Desperation breeds a very specific kind of madness. Stripped of his home, his career, and his friends, Nathan hit absolute rock bottom. His delusional mind managed to conjure one final pathetic plan. He decided his only remaining lifeline was the woman he had thrown away. I had recently relocated my expanding logistics tech company into an ultra-modern state-of-the-art corporate headquarters located in the city's most prestigious business district. The building featured soaring glass walls, biometric security checkpoints, and a massive marble lobby. Nathan, looking disheveled and frantic, loitered outside the building for hours. He waited until a large delivery of office furniture temporarily distracted the front desk security team. Using the chaos as a shield, he slipped through the employee turnstiles, tailgating a group of engineers into the secure elevator bank. He rode the glass elevator up to the executive floor, his chest heaving with manic adrenaline. He believed that if he could just get me alone, he could somehow charm his way back into my life and my bank accounts. I was sitting behind my sleek, minimalist desk, reviewing expansion blueprints for a new international distribution center. The heavy glass door to my executive suite suddenly burst open. Nathan stumbled into the room, his breathing loud and ragged. His clothes were stained, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild with absolute panic. He looked around the massive sunlit office, taking in the undeniable evidence of the empire I was building. His knees gave out. He collapsed onto the plush carpet right in front of my desk, clasping his hands together like a penitent beggar. "Lydia, please," Nathan sobbed, the tears streaming freely down his unwashed face. "I have absolutely nothing left. Devin abandoned me. The banks took everything. I am sleeping in my car. Please, you have to take me back. I was so wrong. I was blinded by greed. You are not ordinary, Lydia. You are brilliant. You are everything I ever wanted. I love you. We can fix this. I can change. Just please do not let me drown like this." I stopped reviewing my blueprints. I slowly placed my pen down on the smooth surface of my desk. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger, pity, or vindication. I simply looked at the sobbing, broken man groveling on my office floor and felt a profound sense of nothingness. He was not a threat anymore. He was just a pathetic consequence of his own monstrous hubris. Without saying a word, I reached under the lip of my desk and firmly pressed the silent security button. I maintained steady, cold eye contact with him while we waited in complete silence. Less than 30 seconds later, 4 heavily built security guards rushed into the executive suite. They grabbed Nathan by the arms, hauling him up from the carpet. "No, Lydia, please," Nathan shrieked, his voice cracking as he thrashed against their tight grips. "Do not do this to me. I am your husband. You cannot just throw me away." I picked up my pen and returned my attention to my architectural blueprints. "Please escort this man out of my building," I instructed the guards, my voice completely flat and professional, "and ensure he is permanently banned from the premises." Nathan screamed my name endlessly as they forcefully dragged his struggling body backward out of the massive glass suite. His pathetic, desperate cries loudly echoed down the pristine executive hallway, slowly growing much fainter and fainter, until the heavy metal elevator doors finally closed shut on him forever. The absolute tranquility slowly returned to my beautiful office, perfectly pristine and entirely undisturbed by his temporary disruption. The total destruction of Nathan was finally complete. His massive arrogance had severely cost him his stolen wealth, his fake dignity, and his entire future. He was now completely erased from my successful reality. 6 months passed with the swift, exhilarating momentum of a massive freight train. The heavy, suffocating shadow of my former marriage was completely replaced by the bright, boundless energy of absolute freedom. I did not just sit quietly on my $34 million fortune. I multiplied it. I channeled my capital, my industry expertise, and my relentless drive into a brand new enterprise. I officially launched my own venture capital fund, headquartered right here in the heart of the financial district. The core mission of the fund was deeply personal and highly specific. We strictly provided capital mentorship and strategic backing to underestimated female founders. I wanted to actively find and elevate the quiet, brilliant women who were currently working in their own home offices wearing simple clothes and being entirely overlooked by the arrogant, superficial men guarding the gates of traditional finance. I wanted to fund the exact type of woman my ex-husband had so foolishly despised. The industry response was phenomenal. Within our very first quarter, we successfully closed seed rounds for 5 incredibly promising technology startups. I was no longer just a software founder. I was a kingmaker in the startup ecosystem. I did not build this new financial powerhouse entirely alone. Sitting across from me in the executive boardroom reviewing a complex term sheet with his signature razor-sharp focus was Jamal. Following the spectacular, highly public implosion of Nathan's real estate scam at the gala, the toxic foundation of that entire family completely fractured. Jamal, a man of profound integrity and brilliant financial acumen, finally hit his absolute limit with Naomi. He realized her obsession with status and her defense of her brother's fraudulent behavior were fundamentally incompatible with his own values. He filed for divorce cleanly, severing his ties to their shallow, destructive drama. The very day his separation was finalized, I called him. I offered him the position of lead financial advisor at my new venture capital fund, presenting a compensation package that rivaled the top investment banks in the city. Jamal accepted immediately. Working together, we formed an absolutely terrifying, unstoppable partnership. His deep expertise in corporate mergers perfectly complemented my background in technology scaling. We moved through the financial sector with brutal efficiency, securing massive returns and aggressively taking market share from the exact same pompous executives who used to attend Nathan's ridiculous networking dinners. It was a late Friday afternoon in early November. The autumn sun was beginning to dip below the towering skyscrapers, casting a long golden light across my expansive penthouse office. The suite was a masterpiece of modern, minimalist design, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a panoramic, uninterrupted view of the entire city skyline. This was the fortress I had built with my own 2 hands. The heavy glass doors slid open, and Rachel walked into the room. She was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, and radiating her usual aura of absolute corporate dominance. She had just finished finalizing the legal framework for our latest startup acquisition. Jamal closed his laptop, stood up from the conference table, and walked over to the custom marble bar cart situated near the massive corner window. He retrieved a bottle of incredibly rare vintage champagne that we had been saving specifically for this moment. The pop of the cork echoed sharply in the quiet, sophisticated space. He poured the sparkling golden liquid into 3 tall crystal flutes, handing one to Rachel and one to me. We formed a small, powerful circle, looking out over the city below. I raised my glass, feeling the cool, heavy crystal against my fingers. I looked at the 2 brilliant, loyal people standing beside me. They were my true partners, my chosen family, and the architects of my new reality. To flawless execution, Rachel said, her sharp eyes gleaming with profound satisfaction. She gently tapped her glass against mine. And to legally binding post-nuptial agreements, the absolute greatest financial gift a highly narcissistic man could ever give a fiercely intelligent woman. Jamal chuckled softly, his deep voice incredibly rich with genuine amusement and deep respect. To recognizing true value, Jamal added, raising his flute toward the ceiling, and to ensuring that the people who blindly worship fake gold are ultimately left holding nothing but absolute dust. We built a beautiful empire here, Lydia. The market has never seen anything quite like us. To the future, I replied softly, sealing the toast. The delicate clinking of our crystal glasses resonated perfectly through the penthouse. I took a very slow, deeply satisfying sip of the truly expensive champagne. The vintage wine tasted like victory crisp and perfectly chilled. I finally turned away from my friends and stepped much closer to the massive glass window. I looked out over the sprawling, chaotic metropolis spread beneath my feet. Millions of people were blindly rushing through the busy streets chasing their own dreams, completely unaware of the massive shifts in power happening in these high-altitude rooms. I watched the city lights slowly begin to flicker on as the evening approached, transforming the urban landscape into a glittering sea of endless possibilities. I was entirely free. The suffocating weight of my toxic past was gone. Nathan and his shallow, grasping family were nothing more than a faded, pathetic memory, permanently banished from my successful existence. I had taken every single insult, every cruel mockery, and every ounce of their profound underestimation, and I had weaponized it all into an indestructible fortune. I had not just survived their betrayal, I had monetized it with absolutely flawless precision. I stood tall in my immaculate, highly tailored suit. I was wealthy, independent, and completely unbothered by the opinions of small, insignificant people. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass, studying the confident, powerful woman looking back at me. A slow, brilliant smile spread across my face. I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that my life would never, ever be ordinary again. The most profound lesson embedded in Lydia's story is the devastating danger of confusing quietness with weakness and superficiality with true success. Nathan's fatal flaw was his absolute obsession with optics. He equated luxury brands' loud boasting and high society networking with actual value. Because Lydia wore comfortable clothes and worked diligently from a home office, he dismissed her as ordinary and viewed her as an anchor holding back his potential. This narcissistic blind spot did not just cost him a deeply loyal marriage, it literally cost him millions. His downfall serves as a powerful reminder of how easily we can misjudge stealthy, consistent hard work when we are blinded by ego. On the flip side, Lydia embodies the extraordinary power of emotional discipline and unshakable self-worth. When confronted with profound betrayal, public humiliation, and financial parasitism, she did not waste her energy on theatrical arguments or desperate pleas for validation. Instead, she compartmentalized her pain and channeled it into strategic, flawless execution. She simply stepped aside and allowed her husband's own towering arrogance to build the very legal trap that eventually secured her freedom. Her ultimate victory was not merely about securing a $34 million acquisition, it was a masterclass in the reclamation of personal power. This narrative teaches us that you never have to scream to prove your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. While others exhaust themselves maintaining a fragile facade, true power lies in building actual substance in the shadows. When you know your own value, you can afford to let the arrogant underestimate you, while your success makes all the noise. If you have ever been underestimated or made to feel ordinary by someone who could not see your true potential, share how you proved them wrong in the comments below, and subscribe to join our community.